I went from being a 25-year-old in San Francisco, Airbnb out my apartment to help pay my rent, to building hundreds of millions of dollars in Airbnb buildings. When I was young, I figured out that I could have a super flexible lifestyle, travel, pay for my flights, pay for my vacations by Airbnb out my apartment. And that really made a light bulb go off for me that this was an amazing investment model for the future. That was over 15 years ago, and I've come a long way to provide this investment model to other retail investors that want cash flow. If you don't want to get trapped in the traditional mires of owning a bunch of real estate with leaky toilets and all the property management issues that come with buying cash flowing real estate, then you need to consider a flexible investment business model with Airbnb. I'm Meg Epstein. I'm a real estate developer, and I have built hundreds of units of Airbnb condos that are short-term rented for group and flexible travel and give people a flexible lifestyle for their investing. When I first moved to San Francisco, it was 2012, and the real estate market was, kind of recovering from the Great Recession. And I rented a studio out in the Marina District, which is kind of like a great trendy area of San Francisco. And I wanted to travel. I was sort of a couple years out of college, had wanderlust, and basically could work a bit remotely even then, which was a newer concept. But and I got used to the idea of Airbnb. It was just sort of kind of coming around. And I was obviously started in San Francisco as, literally meant like an air bed and breakfast, meaning, people renting out an air mattress in their living room. And so this was a really great for me because I remember being able to go to Asia and pay for my flight and back and my whole trip basically, because I could get, maybe $200 a night back then for a studio in the Marina in San Francisco. I didn't realize, and I was young, I wasn't making a lot of money. I, probably couldn't have afforded to travel the way that I did without Airbnb my place, but it actually ended up being like I could pay for my whole rent in less than a week. And I was always such an entrepreneur. I became so entrepreneurial about this that I would go, stay at my parents' house in Sacramento. I'd go drive home for the weekend to rent out my place, depending on how much I could rent it out for. But it was actually something that really taught me how to be, it was like my first entrepreneurial venture. And, I think technically it probably wasn't allowed in my apartment building, but back then it wasn't. Airbnb didn't have the same, connotations with local jurisdictions. There wasn't legislation that addressed it yet. And so my building manager kind of just let it slide. He was, and I would have some repeat tenants and things like that. But it just was an amazing arrangement for me. And once I met my husband and moved to Nashville, I started spending half my time in Nashville. And I thought, how powerful is this? I have just a normal salaried job, just kind of like anybody. I wasn't, didn't have my own company yet. But I had this lifestyle that afforded me living in San Francisco and spending a bunch of time either abroad or in Nashville and being able to make real income off of doing it. And I would just have, I set up a cleaning service system with a woman that cleaned the building, and I would send out the laundry, and all that was included. And I was still making, maybe it was like $60,000 a year of just renting out my studio. So it really kind of opened my eyes to something that was powerful. And lo and behold, it's very funny how life works out. But later, after I'd moved to San Francisco, I was delivering my very first condo building, and the agents told me that we're selling my building. Oh, why don't you allow for people to Airbnb this out? And I didn't really put two and two together, but that was sort of the beginning of this career that I've built around offering this lifestyle for people to be able to make income on their residence or, just on a straight income producing property. And so we delivered our first building. I think it sold out in, 90% of it was sold in a few weeks, and it was a total hit. And we realized that this was going to be an in-demand thing. And once just like anything, I mean, just as Airbnb has evolved as a company and as it's evolved since post-COVID, and the demand for people traveling in a context of having a home to stay in versus being in a hotel, particularly if you're going to be trying to spend longer periods of time anywhere, or you're taking your family, or you're traveling with a group. This is a trend that's just sort of evolved, and the hotel sector hasn't completely caught up with it. So I saw a really big opportunity here, and this is kind of one of the things that has made my career, and I decided to lean into. But I thought it was kind of funny because it afforded me the lifestyle I wanted as a 24-year-old living in the city, and it was my first entrepreneurial venture that really gave me financial freedom. I think I had one of the top listings in San Francisco. And so they sent a photographer, take pictures. They just made it really easy. And I never had any issues. I mean, I just set it up. So I had this cleaning lady that would come after, and I would book it out myself. And, I didn't have any software or anything other than just using the Airbnb software. And it's funny now because we have so many buyers of our building whose main job, their main job that they do is they manage about 10 units or something. And they, that's where they put their time, and it affords them this very nice lifestyle because they have cash flow off of real estate. And then, and their job is to coordinate all the work of cleaning and booking and those things, but it can be powerful. Now, Airbnb has been around so long and they have a huge lobby and everything, but back then it was sort of like, it wasn't really, there wasn't like local laws to deal with Airbnb and short-term rental. It wasn't such a phenomenon. And so now you have, anti-Airbnb and people that don't want the group travel, they don't want their homes being turned into hotels and all of these things. We've addressed that in our buildings by building in zones that are meant for hotel and hospitality use. But it's definitely an ongoing issue for Airbnb for sure. I learned a lot of entrepreneurial lessons from this journey. First, as an entrepreneur, I ended up making the most money in my career on something that I started doing when I was 22 and I saw a need for, and then I executed on that scalable strategy. So I took something that I saw a blank spot in the market and I go, wow, this should be offered more. And then I did that, times 100 for other people. And I think that's just generally an awesome entrepreneurial lesson. Like, what problem exists in the market that you solved that you can offer that solution to other people? And that is, the story of entrepreneurship exactly. And making sure that, you're offering and solving a problem for people. And that's what gives you scalability. So I think it's ironic. I never planned it. No one would have told me when I was 24 years old renting out my Airbnb that I would be, creating a business model for a bunch of people in 15 years from then. But it's funny because you have to do something that is really, that you know about and that you're passionate about and that you can live and breathe. And that for me was a total powerful moment when I could exist and have the lifestyle I wanted and decent cash flow by using the power of Airbnb. So that taught me a lot about entrepreneurship because I'm now really leaning into this strategy and scaling it. But, it was a journey I started 15 years ago. So the other lesson I would say is that I think it's really important when you start as a real estate investor, understanding what you're investing in. And traditionally, if you want to invest in cash flowing real estate, you're buying a house. Well, houses have roofs and leaky toilets and all the things. And Airbnb, or at least the buildings I build as an example, gives you, there's a lot higher level of property management that can be integrated into it. So when I build a building, I offer all of the property management included in the Airbnb rental. And I would just consider that if you're an investor, that you know what you're getting into, because as a retail investor that's only investing, say you have $50,000 to start, you have to really make sure you don't get mired down in all of the pains of renting out real estate. And so that's kind of a way that it's all part of owning actual investment properties, but I think it's really important to make sure you know what you're getting into. I think it's really important to find investments that align with your lifestyle. I've seen people do really well because, their dad built warehouses or he worked in a warehouse, and then as a real estate investor they created warehouses because they grew up kind of in that environment and understood the industrial sector. I think it really makes sense to invest in things that you can connect with, and for me that was, as I mentioned, Airbnb, a building that allowed for Airbnb and gave people that sort of flexible lifestyle. So for me, I really try to practice minimalism in my life. And I think that started with the idea of having to rent out my apartment and not having a bunch of junk around. And I've carried that through. And I would even still, set up my home to Airbnb today, because I think it's just an amazing opportunity to be able to pick up and leave for an entire summer and be able to pay for your trip somewhere else or your whole life somewhere else, because you can rent out your home. So you have to do something that you're passionate about and connects with, your lifestyle. And if that's, for me, that's flexible living and this idea that you can kind of live a nomadic life or live in different places. And that affords me that. So that's how I took a personal success and turned it into $100 million business model, offering Airbnb to others. If you want to hear more about how I generated cash flow by investing in an asset class that others ignored, watch this next video.